So we are about to start our last book of the year, which I know is crazy to think about that this year is almost over, but it's actually one of my personal favorite books. And usually, when I read this with a group of students, they really enjoy it as well, and they find that they can relate to the characters and they really get into it. But it kind of takes us out of our comfort zone a little bit. And in this story, we're going to have to learn about a new place, new cultures, new things that we probably, or many of us, haven't experienced. So I like to give a lot of background knowledge for it. So this book, here's one of the possible covers. Your cover probably looks different, but it's called Bronx Masquerade, and it's by a woman named Nikki Grimes. Nikki Grimes was born and raised in New York City. So a lot of the books she writes take place in New York City. That's the area she knows, it's the upbringing she knows. And she started writing, like she liked writing short stories and poems and stuff, by the age of 6. So it's something she's always wanted to do, especially poetry. She considered herself to be more of a poet than like writing novels. And her stories, even though she lives in California now, still take place in New York City, most of them. And they're kind of told like the crossover. So if you like the crossover, or at least the style of it, I think you'll really like this one. But this one, where some of you really liked the crossover because of the sports aspect, this one has sports and other things. So if you're not really somebody who's into sports, you can still get into this book as well. So this book is set in a classroom in the Bronx, New York, which I'm going to talk about the Bronx in a minute so that you have that background information. But the way it kind of opens up, no spoilers here or anything, is that this teacher has a classroom with 18 students in it. And it's supposed to be like I think about a 10th grade classroom, so not much older than you guys. But he has this classroom with 18 students, and one day he invites one of them to share a poem that they've written in front of the class. And all the kids really get into it, so he creates these open mic Fridays where every Friday the kids can come out and share their poetry. So the way the story is set up, you have a character in prose that's like story format telling you about something that's happening in their life, whatever it might be. And then you see their poem that they had for that open mic Friday. And then the next chapter, I guess it'd be called, is another character telling you what's happening in their life, and then their poem. And each character, some of them speak, 5, 6 times. It just depends. But I like it because it's also a quick read. The prose section and the poems are very short. So you can kind of get through it and you can feel like you know each character without um, really having to read for hours on end. A possible theme for this book, or probably the number one theme, if you remember, theme is the lesson that the author is trying to teach you, kind of like the moral of the story. And a major theme of this is unveiling a mask, revealing your true identity. And I usually like to do an assignment. I'm hoping I get to it this year, where I say, if you really knew me, you would know. And that's kind of the idea that through these poetry, through these open mic readings, the kids are finally able to reveal kind of who they really are. I don't want to say secrets because it's not like, oh, I have this deep, dark secret that I haven't told my class. But a lot of times we put on a show for our classmates. We're not the same person in real life that we are in the classroom because we want to be perceived as someone or something else. And that's what so many students around the country, around the world do. And these students are finally saying, I'm going to actually chip away at that and show my classmates who I really am. So here's what you need to know about the Bronx. The Bronx is located in New York City, and it's about as wide as the distance from Bryson City to Canton, or maybe like Andrews to Bryson City is about the same distance, maybe a little bit more than that. So it's a pretty big section of New York City, and it has a very high population density, which means there's a lot of people in a small area. Instead of like if we think of Hiawassee Dam or Murphy or any of that, you have this large county, and yeah, there's about 30,000 people, but they're pretty spread out. You're not like houses aren't right on top of each other and that kind of thing. In the Bronx, you have an area about the same size, with a population just so much more than this area. So they are really kind of packed in there like sardines, I guess is the expression. Um, and it used to have a very diverse European culture. You know, German immigrants, Irish immigrants, um, French immigrants, Italian immigrants was very strong. And so you had all these different European cultures. And then up towards the 1950s, there were a lot of African Americans that moved in that area, and the Hispanic population really grew. So while it's predominantly African American and Hispanic now, it still has a lot of really rich, diverse cultures and people that are holding true to their cultures and their backgrounds, their familial backgrounds. So when you go there, you can learn about all these different countries and cultures just in one small classroom, which is really neat in this book as well, because we're going to learn about so many different types of people. This is what a typical street in the Bronx looks like if it's not super crowded that day. You can see that, unlike this area, where houses usually are one or two stories and spread out, they build upwards. So, like, all these are apartment buildings that people would live in because you can get more people in the same footprint area. On a typical day as well, very crowded streets. You're going to be stuck in traffic. A lot of people walking places to get where they need to go. Not many people in New York City, especially in this area, have cars, and it's not necessarily a they can't afford cars. It doesn't make sense. Parking is a nightmare. Driving places, you could get there faster by bus or subway or walking or bike. So why spend the money on a car if you can get there in a more efficient way? So the Bronx has kind of a reputation. One of the things that they're very well known for is unsafe schools, and this has a lot of factors that go into it as far as resources for the schools. But there are a lot of gangs in the Bronx. And kids that are looking for groups to fit in, and so they do join gangs, and then therefore you have rival gangs at the same school, and there can be fighting, threats. It can get very dangerous. Often they're known for having metal detectors at the doors so that you can make sure that students aren't bringing weapons into school of any form. And it's a challenge just to keep the kids safe. It's not like where we think of when we think of the news with like mass shootings. It's not really as much mass shootings as like targeted gang violence. They have, because of that, I'm kind of going out of order on here, a lot of bullying as well. Part of that's from gangs, part of that's from these different cultural backgrounds. Like Italians don't like Hispanics or whatever. A lot of it's kind of racially or culturally charged. Um, and I don't know if that's necessarily one of the bullying things, but I'm just saying different groups at bully each other, call each other names, and kind of ostracize each other group and separate them. They have a high emphasis on sports. Sports are very important, more so than academics, which I know we kind of joke about that at different schools, even across our state, where they make those comments. But in this case, it's more like it's the kids place the emphasis on that being smart is considered nerdy and uncool, but if you can play sports you're really cool. And so the kids put the emphasis on that, and that sports are more important. And then the last two kind of go together. A high rate of teen pregnancy and single moms. Let me preface this by saying I am in no way saying anything against single moms, because whew, those are some of the strongest women I've ever met. I have several in my family that I, I'm in awe every day of the work that they do to take care of their children. But what's happening is, as a single mom, especially in the Bronx, in order to pay very high rent, much higher than around here, bills are much higher. A lot of these women have to take on two or three jobs in order to support their family. And so their kids are coming home to an empty house, home alone. Many of you maybe do that. I did that as a kid as well. And they're there, cooking their own dinner, and they're kind of doing their own thing. And mom's doing her best to put food on the table and pay bills, and the kids don't necessarily have immediate supervision, and so that's where they're going out and joining gangs, or um, often that's how teen pregnancy arises. And then it kind of creates a vicious cycle, because within the teen pregnancy, a lot of them end up dropping out of school in this area. And then the men don't typically stick around for teen pregnancies in the Bronx. It's well known, documented there. And so then those girls become single moms themselves, and it kind of creates this cycle that they have a hard time getting out of. So these are all issues that are well documented in the Bronx, and things that they definitely want to take care of and fix. But there's so many different factors at hand that make that difficult. So when we read this book, you will see all of this stuff represented. It's going to talk about drive-by shootings. It's going to talk about drugs to an extent. It's going to talk about all these issues, the idea of teen pregnancy, but you're going to see it from multiple perspectives. And I think that's really neat about this book, and I'm really looking forward to reading it with you guys.